I lived in the Everglades all my life. Most of it just south of Little Shark River on the west side of Oyster Bay. My place is right on the edge of the water, and my nearest neighbor is over a mile away. That's how I like it, too. I ain't that fond of people as a rule. I had me a little red-bone hound named Skeeter for the last 5 years, and I spent a lot of time out in the glades, hunting and fishing. No matter where I was going, he would come along. I heard him barking up a storm out by the water earlier on a Sunday morning. About 3 weeks ago, though. And I ain't seen him since. Been worried that maybe a gator got him. Either that or somebody took him. I'd almost rather it be the gator. I got a chicken coop beside my house where I was keeping 4 laying hens. The building itself is small, maybe 6 by 10, just like my house. It sits on stumps about 2 feet off the ground in case my yard floods. The last Saturday morning I went out to gather eggs, and one of my hens was missing. I looked around for a good while, never found no sign of her. It could have been a bird of prey that got her. Figured it might have been likely coyotes. They've been a lot braver these last years, not as shy of people as they used to be. Plus, Skeeter ain't been around to warn them off. After I noticed that the chickens ain't been coming out into the yard as often as usual, which is a pretty good sign that there'd been a predator around. This morning, like I always did, I went out to gather the eggs, discovered that my hen population had gone from 3 to 2. I was more than irritated. I was flat out mad. I understood that coyotes and other critters, they had to sustain themselves just like me. There was plenty of things out in the wild for them to eat, and they didn't have to come for my chickens. Plus, they'd scared my other hen to the point that they wouldn't lay. I was going to have to eat breakfast without eggs. So I looked around inside the coop. I didn't see no signs of coyotes or foxes, or anything else for that matter. So I went outside to see what I could find. It rained earlier, so I should have been able to find tracks of some sort. I looked around the coop, though, and I didn't find none at all. That was curious. Mighty curious. I reckon it was possible that she'd wandered off down the water, but that would have been unusual as well. Especially for my chickens. See, my chickens stayed close. I'd never seen any of them wander off down towards the water. I walked back towards the house when I saw something peculiar. It looked like there was a pair of eyes watching me from beneath the coop, like little glints of light that I could see there in the dark. I didn't want to get too close in case it was something that might have been coming at me, like maybe a rabid coon or a fox, but as I got closer, I dared and bent down real low, and it was definitely a pair of eyes. They didn't look like no coon or no fox. They didn't look like a gator, neither. Not unless it was a mighty small one. Eyes were too close together. Finally, I decided to shine the light from my phone to see what it was. And I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me by then, but what I saw beneath the coop was a snake. And when I say snake, I don't mean a rat snake or a chicken snake. I mean a big-ass snake. Like a python, an anaconda. Swear to God, its head looked like it was as wide as both my fists put together. It was hard to tell because it was all curled up on the ground, but parts of its body looked to be as big and round as my leg. I won't lie, it scared the shit out of me, probably because I hadn't been expecting it. It wasn't all that long ago that there wasn't any python or anaconda in the glades, but then ignorant city folks started getting them as pets. Once the snakes had grown and the people had realized they'd wound up with more than they bargained for, they just let them loose into the glades. Given that the snakes didn't have any natural predators in these parts, they apparently done pretty well for themselves. Personally, I don't have nothing against big snakes as a rule. It weren't their fault that they got put here, and just like everything else, they were doing what they had to do to survive. This snake in particular, though, it had most likely eaten 2 of my chickens. As big as that snake was, it might have been what got Skeeter. And that made us blood enemies, me and the snake. And I intended to set things right. Well, I went up to the house, I got my shotgun, and on the way back, I was already thinking about the belt or the headband or even the boots I might make out of this hide. Big as it was, I could probably pick and choose. And I got back down to the coop and shined under it with a proper flashlight, to my surprise and discomfort. The snake was gone. It was startling. I gave a quick look around to be sure that I wasn't about to get attacked. There was no sign of it. I gave a quick look inside the coop. There sat my 2 chickens looking at me like they wanted to ask a question, but they were too stupid to know what to ask. They were alone. No sound of the snake inside. I went back out and started looking, making bigger and bigger half circles until I had finally made it down to the water. I saw several places that looked like where maybe a snake had slithered through, but I couldn't be sure. Just hadn't been around enough of them to know for certain. Anyway, after about a half an hour of looking, I decided that maybe I should put something up around the base of the coop to keep the snake from coming back and hiding there, where it could lie in wait for my hens. Well, I took some chicken wire, I nailed it all the way around the building, and then I staked it into the ground till it was nice and snug. That snake would have to do some damage to itself to get past that wire, unless, otherwise it'd have to wait out in the open where it would have to deal with me. It was a hot and muggy day already, so I was muddied and dripping with sweat by the time I'd finished with the chicken wire, so I decided to take a shower before I had breakfast. But no great loss. I didn't even have any eggs, so I showered, which made me feel better all by myself. No great loss. I didn't even have any eggs. So I showered, which made me feel better all by itself. And once I got out, I caught my reflection in the mirror, so I stopped and gave myself a look. I could probably use a shave, but I haven't given my straight razor a good stopping in a while, which meant it would yank my whiskers as much as it would cut them off, so I didn't bother. I started from my bedroom, a towel draped over my shoulder, and I barely put my first foot out of the bathroom and into the hall when I saw it. Just a flash of something low and large coming at me. In that same instant, the big snake hit my leg, high up on my thigh, and the force of the impact knocked me off my feet and sent me crashing to the floor. I heard people talk about how something or other seemed surreal, but I'd never truly understood what they meant. Until then. The pain in my thigh was immediate. I knew the snake wasn't venomous and that it didn't have fangs, but its teeth were plenty big and plenty sharp. I could feel them tearing away at my thigh muscle. It all happened in a hurry, too. By the time I'd found my bearings, I was lying on my side with that big snake wrapped around my leg 2 or 3 times and its mouth latched hard onto my thigh. My God, that thing's head was huge. It looked to me like its mouth had bit down over halfway around my thigh, and I wasn't a small man by any means. The snake was still trying to get itself around me too, around my middle. It had already trapped one of my arms against my side, but the other one was free. I started banging on the snake anywhere I could get at it, but it didn't seem to make any difference at all. It was solid, almost like a piece of wood covered in scaly skin, and my blows just glanced off it without making a difference. It was heavy too, and bigger around than I could have reached with both my hands. It was all I could do just to raise myself off the floor with one of my free arms. But when I did, the snake managed to get another coil around my middle, more up towards my chest. But then the lower half of my leg started to ache from all the blood being trapped in it, and my foot was tingling with thousands of pinpricks. The snake was working its jaw too, digging its teeth further into my thigh. I got a glimpse of my foot. It was starting to turn purple. I think it was about then that my shock began to turn to panic. I could feel the snake starting to squeeze, like a constant pressure getting heavier and heavier on my middle. It was starting to affect my ability to breathe too, like each breath I took was just a little bit smaller than the one before it. A new wave of panic set in, and maybe it was determination. Either way, I used my free leg to start kicking at the snake. The part that was wrapped around my other leg, like when I'd been hitting it, it didn't seem to faze the snake. I'd started rocking back and forth when I was kicking at it though, and before long, it seemed to me that the snake's coils around my middle were shifting, like maybe it was trying to get its grip higher up. And I was in a full fight mode by then, and before too long, I managed to pull my arm free and lean up against the wall. Just then, though, the snake tightened the length of its body, and one of its coils was straight across my chest. It squeezed down hard, and I could feel my lungs starting to seize up. Like I said before, I'd lived in the Glades all my life, and I'd been out in the wilderness since I was a little boy. I'd run up against gators and water moccasins, snapping turtles and panthers, hurricanes and droughts. Every danger there in the Glades had to offer, but never in my wildest dreams did it occur to me that I would be taken by a giant snake, one that wasn't even native to Florida. It truly was surreal in the most bizarre sense of the word. I was hardly able to do more than pant by then. The snake kept tightening its grip on my chest with its powerful coils. Little by little, inch by inch, taking away my ability to fill my lungs. I was starting to feel lightheaded too, like maybe I was going to hyperventilate. I'll admit it. I was terrified. It was like I was staring at the end right in my face. and there wasn't nothing I could do about it. The thing was, I wasn't ready to die, no matter what the cause. I didn't feel like my time on Earth was supposed to end just yet. I was in a bad fix, but I wasn't done. Not while I still had any breath left in my body. And that's when I remembered. The straight razor, it was still on the sink. And after working at it, I managed to turn my body enough for my free foot to push past the wall, moving me in the direction of the bathroom door. But not only had the snake incapacitated one of my legs and hampered my ability to breathe, it was also heavier than hell, trying to move with it all wrapped around me like it was trying to shove a bathtub full of water. I wasn't relenting, though. I finally managed to grab hold of the door jamb with both my hands, and then I could both pull with my arms and push with my leg, and I got myself about halfway through the door, and then I rolled over onto my back right next to the leg that held up the sink. My muscles were running out of air by then, though, and it felt like I was losing my strength. I tried to roll to my side, but I wasn't able. The snake seemed to have adjusted itself around my chest in a way that it gave me more leverage, and it squeezed me harder than ever. For a second, I thought that I was about to pass out, but I fought it as hard as I could. Fought to take in as much air as possible, and finally managed to push myself to my side. I took hold of one of the sink's legs and started pulling. I pulled as hard as I could with every ounce of strength that I had left in me until my hands reached the top of the sink. I held myself up with one hand and frantically searched around the surface for the other. Just when I thought that my arms were about to give way, I felt the razor. I tried to grab it, but I only managed to knock it to the floor as I lost my grip on the sink, and it bounced to the front of the commode. Not to be deterred, I managed to take a few sips of air and started rocking my body. I rocked until I finally toppled over, banged my head against the side of the tub in the process, but that had gotten me close enough. I took the razor and started trying to cut the snake. First one place, then another, but I was having little to no luck. I really had let that razor get dull. I focused the blade on one spot right over my chest and finally started to make a little progress. The snake didn't relent, though. In fact, it seemed to intensify its grip. I felt something pop inside my chest like a rib breaking, and pain immediately seared through me. I had no choice. No choice but to stop cutting. I fell over against the wall, feeling like I was about to black out. Through the tunnel of what was left of my vision, I saw the snake's head, still latched onto my thigh. Probably as a reflex more than anything else, I reached for the razor at the snake's head and started slashing hard as I could, over and over. And the next thing I remember seeing was my bloody thigh. Blood flowing from my wound, and then there was the snake's head coming at me. At my face, at my hand. The one that was holding the razor. I just kept slashing at it, punching, kicking with my good leg. And about then, it occurred to me that I could breathe. It hurt too, but I could take in air. The snake had loosened its grip on my chest. It was about then that the snake struck right at my face. It knocked me back against the wall and latched on from below my chin at the top of my forehead. I was nothing but a pile of desperation by then, though, and I kept slashing. At some point, I got the razor up next to the snake's jaw, and I started sawing, and pretty soon, it let my face go and fell away. I tried to stand up, but I didn't have the strength, so I just started kicking with my good leg. And I kept that leg going like a piston, like a crazy man, screaming and cussing all the while. And pretty soon I realized that all the coils had pretty much fallen away from me. At least they were loose enough to where I could wriggle my way out of them, so I did. I rolled over next to the commode and I kept kicking and yelling, and the snake sort of regathered onto itself like it was preparing to come back at me. And it occurred to me that most of its body was either in the hall or in the bathroom door threshold, though, so I made a snap decision. I lunged at the snake before it could lunge at me, and I grabbed the door, and I tried to slam it shut. And I wasn't able to because the snake was still partially in the way, and all it truly was heavy as hell, but I was on one side of the door, and it was on the other, and I kept pushing, and I kept pushing, and I kept pushing, until finally I was able to close the door all the way. And once I heard the latch catch, I collapsed on the floor, thoroughly exhausted, heaving for breath. And it was only then that I felt the pain in my chest again. Like somebody was stabbing me with a knife. Every breath I took, the pain was better than not being able to breathe. So I kept on breathing. I don't know how long I lay there. It was a while. But I finally came around, and this wasn't over. I still had a large snake in my house. And the only thing separating me and it was my bathroom door, aside from the straight razor that had been my salvation. There wasn't anything else in the bathroom of any use to me. That wasn't entirely true. There was rubbing alcohol and gauze and tape, and I could clean and dress my wound, so that's what I did. The wound on my thigh was pretty gruesome. There was blood all over my leg. I wiped it down, washed it off best I could, and I gave it a good look. It was all mangled and still bleeding, but at least it wasn't pulsing. Snake hadn't got any arteries. Still, I had lost some blood, and I needed to do what I could to slow it down. Put the rubbing alcohol all over it. It burned like a son of a bitch. And when I wrapped it down again, and I wrapped it up tight as I could with gauze and tape, in one sense, I thought I'd been pretty lucky. Had that snake took hold of me about 2 inches higher, well, then it could have done some real damage. Some were probably from the snake's teeth, some from the razor, but none of them appeared to be too bad. Tried to stand up so I could wash them off in the sink, but found I really wasn't able to. Had to pull myself up against the wall and then lean onto the sink to keep my balance. My bad leg was still pretty useless. Felt like dead weight. Still, I washed my hands and I took a look at myself in the mirror. That was a pretty ghoulish sight. Blood all over my face. I washed it off and saw pretty much what I'd expected. It was an oval ring of little cuts from the top of my forehead, down my nose, under my chin, and back up the right side of my face, where the snake had taken hold of me. Like the cuts in my hands, though, none of them were really that bad, so I just kept washing them off and putting pressure on them until they had all but stopped bleeding. Now I was worn out. So I took a seat on the commode and I started thinking. Above everything else, I was elated to be alive, but I knew that I still had some hurdles to clear. Thought about trying to get out of the bathroom window, but it was a little ways up. It was a little way up high. I think I'd be able to get myself out of it in my present condition. And even if I did, what do I do next? Like I said, my nearest neighbor was over a mile away. No way I was walking that far. Key to my truck was in the kitchen, as was my boat key, and my phone was in the bedroom, sitting on my bed, right beside my shotgun. Everything I needed at that moment was in one of those 2 rooms, and the one thing those 2 rooms had in common, I had to go out into the hall to get to either one of them. And as far as I knew, that big snake was still right on the other side of the door. I know I couldn't wait in the bathroom forever, though. It could be that someone would come for a visit today, but it was more likely no one would come for around a week or maybe more. Staying put wasn't an option, so I made my decision. Get myself a drink, rested just a bit more, and then I crawled over to the door. My decision? Again, I grew up in the Glades, so I was going for the gun. Didn't take me long to work up my nerve. I just turned the doorknob quiet as I could, and then I slowly brought the door in an inch, maybe 2, until I could see just a little bit out into the hall. There's nothing there, at least not where I could see. I opened it up a little bit more, keeping my shoulder braced against it in case I had to ram it shut in a hurry. Still, the snake didn't show itself. Of course, I fully expected it to attack as soon as I put myself into the hall. So before I did, I stuck my hand out as a decoy. Nothing happened. So real cautious-like, I peeked around the door, looking one way and the other. Real fast, I didn't see a thing. I opened the door the rest of the way, and as quiet as I could, which wasn't very, I crawled out into the hall. I moved towards my bedroom real slow, partly to keep the noise down, but partly because I just couldn't go very fast. The hall looked like a long tunnel, like you'd see in those scary movies where you knew the person headed down it was about to run into disaster. And I kept on going, though. I wasn't going to be kept from my own bedroom by a snake, no matter how big it was. I finally made it to the threshold, and I could see the butt of my shotgun hanging off the end of my bed. Nothing to it. I just keep going, so I did. By the time I saw it, though, it was too late. had been coiled up across a pile of dirty clothes in the corner, and just like it done before, it sprung out at me like a flash of lightning. It seemed like before I'd even be able to move a muscle, it latched itself onto my shoulder and knocked me onto my side. This time, though, instead of lying still while the big snake had coiled itself around me, I got to moving. The first thing I did was push back as hard as I could, then rolled forward, and when I felt it coming under me, I rolled toward it, sort of bringing it back against itself. Didn't let go, though, but it hadn't been able to wrap me up yet, neither. I tried to stand so I could get onto the bed, but I wasn't able. My bad leg went out from under me and I crashed back down to the floor, and that's when it got me. Before I knew it, it had 2 huge coils around my chest and it started to squeeze, and my adrenaline was fueling me, but I knew I simply didn't have the strength that I'd had the first time around. I could feel the snake's grip get tighter and tighter, and I knew I wouldn't be able to fight for long. As fate would have it, though, we'd fallen to the floor right at the foot of my bed, and there sat the butt of my shotgun right over me, just waiting to be taken hold of. I still had one good arm, so I reached up and I grabbed it, and then I gave it a good pump. The snake's head was too close for me to pull the muzzle on it, but it was a big snake, so there were lots of targets. I wedged the barrel underneath it and forced the muzzle against its neck as close to the head as I could get it, and then I pulled the trigger. I don't think I heard a shotgun discharge inside a house before, but the blast was deafening. My ears started ringing and I could smell gunpowder right away, and I could smell the blood too, and I could see where it splattered all over the walls. The snake's neck was so thick, though, that the blast hadn't blown it clean into. I gave the shotgun another pump, and then I gave the snake another blast. At that time, the snake's body fell away, leaving its head hanging from my shoulder by its teeth. I took hold of the snake's head and I pulled it off me, and then I flung it across the room. The snake's massive body was still moving in spasms, but nothing that felt like it had intent. I slew off the coils from my body, and then I sat on the edge of my bed and I just stared at the snake there on the floor. Oh, it must have been 16, maybe 18 feet long. How in the hell had it found its way up underneath my chicken coop? And how in the hell had it found its way into my house? I'd probably never know the answer to the first question, but I sure as hell was going to figure out the answer to the second. If there was one of those monsters out there, there was bound to be another. I had no intention of going through what I had just gone through again. Probably needed to go to the doctor so you could see about my leg and my ribs, but for the time being, I wasn't about to go nowhere except to my kitchen. More specifically, my refrigerator, and grab me a cold beer. I took it to my recliner, and even though it was before noon, I took me a good long drink. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching tonight's video. Or watching tonight, or listening to tonight's podcast, because it's also a podcast on Spotify, or on Apple, or on Google, or anywhere else you can listen to the podcast. If you've all been curious about what I look like, and not just what I sound like, then you might be getting your chance to be able to see that. On Indiegogo right now, there is a project called Giggles Indie Horror Movie. The Giggles Indie Horror Movie is something that's spearheaded by Madame Macabre, and I'm sure you're all aware of her. It's a film that I've been asked to play one of the major leads in, and I'm super excited about it, so I hope that all of you are excited about it as well. You can check out the trailer there on the Indiegogo page, as well as a lot of the different effects and makeup that they're working on for this clown-themed horror film. And lastly, as always, I want to remind you guys, if you ever want to support the show, you can do so at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. And I really appreciate any time you guys can support the show, because honestly, I love you guys. You're all awesome. So, a very special thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Haha Saha, Ken Lenda Higuchi, Mazakine, Champinski, The Red Oak Shield Virus, G Weevil 3, Diana Kraus, Stephen Van Huss, Chance Burnett, Tristan Pelton, Nico Cowell, The Ginger Bros, Last Blade Song, Caleb Dougal, Sky Harbor, The Homeless Bird 93, Bobby Karen, Liam Newman, Aaron Stormcrow, Barbara Maceo, Thomas Burgett, S-Man, Kiri the Sloth, Bad Honey, Someone You Love, Said the King 56, Shadow Morningstar, Mad Marstomp, Mr. Thud, Patrick Schoolmeister, Z. Kearley, Wolfie Nums, Rafael Rodriguez, WR Axis, Prozac and Pancakes, Mike Bullock, Acid System, Lauren, Brian Ars, and Rumble Fox. And also a huge thank you to everybody who's down there in the description down below. You guys, as always, are the real MVPs, and I appreciate you more than I can possibly say. So thank you guys, thank you all for listening, and sweet dreams.